We are going to give people a little bit more time to sign on and get started just maybe in 3 minutes or so. Thanks for your patience. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Oregon Department of Energy's webinar, where we will be sharing information about the energy-related provisions of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and seeking feedback from you as to how we can best shape our efforts to direct these resources to benefit Oregon. Just a reminder that this is the second of two webinars that we are having on this topic. Our first webinar was on July 12th, and we will be making the same presentation and covering the same materials tonight that we did on July 12th. All right, my name is Janine Benner. I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Energy. And again, thank you so much for joining today. Very soon, I will be turning this over to Jen Senner, our federal grants coordinator, to lead the conversation. And I'm also introduced by a few additional ODO staff today, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves in the chat, please. And I'd actually welcome the other participants in the call to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, and if you're representing any particular organization, we'd love to know. So I want to start off by acknowledging that many of you likely have questions about the funding, the timing, whether or not a specific project that you're thinking of might be eligible under the funding streams we'll discuss today. And at this time, we also have many questions. As we move through the presentation, we hope that you'll ask us questions and we will do our best to respond, though we just may not have answers to everything yet, and we may not have time to answer every question live today. But if we don't get to them, we'll gather up your questions and respond on our website in the weeks following this presentation if necessary. Because of the format of this webinar and the number of people in attendance, we have everyone muted currently. But as we go through the presentation this evening, we'll pause for questions, and at that point, we'll be able to unmute individuals to ask questions. And we'd also encourage you to use the chat function to ask questions as well. We will be using some polling features for real-time feedback. And finally, in addition to responding and sharing your thoughts during this webinar, you can also enter your thoughts and feedback through an online portal that we've set up if you'd like more space to respond or more time to consider your responses. And I'm going to ask my colleague Casey to put the link to the portal in the chat when she has a moment. All right, next slide, please. So here is an overview of today's presentation that we'll be sharing information about our agency, some background on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, including highlights of energy-related provisions. Then we will cover the community engagement work we've done so far and what lies ahead in our planning process. Towards the end, we have specific opportunities for you to provide input and feedback. We will also cover how we intend to use the information gathered through this process. And again, the presentation materials are posted on our website, and we're also recording this webinar. So for those of you who are new to WebEx, here's a quick guide on how to use some of the features. As I mentioned before, your unmute button and video buttons won't work, but our host will be able to unmute you if we call on you to ask a question. So you can see the option to raise your hand on both the right-hand side of your screen under the participants panel if you click near your name. And there's also an option at the bottom of your screen where you can see a visual of a hand in the reactions bar. Feel free to use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. We'll have Odo staff monitoring that, and we'll make sure they get responded to either live or in writing. And please send the question to all panelists. It's an option under the dropout bar, so that, or everyone, so the Odo staff can see it and help respond. And again, we'll try to get to as many questions in the chat and through raised hands, but we might not have time for all of them today. So one more thing to highlight that's not on this slide is that on the right where you see participants and chat, every once in a while there will be a poll that pops up and it will have the title Slido on it. So we encourage you to participate by checking a circle or a box or entering a response. And then don't forget to press send when you enter your response so it's actually submitted to us. So before we jump in, a quick introduction to the Oregon Department of Energy, or ODO, as you might hear us referred to. On this slide, you see our vision, our mission, and what we do. Our mission is to help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable, clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. Under what we do, you'll see the services we provide and how we achieve our mission. And today we'll be discussing how federal funding opportunities can support our mission and our work on behalf of Oregonians. Next slide, please. So our purpose today is twofold. First, to share what we know about federal funding opportunities under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And second, to seek your input as to how ODO should approach these funding opportunities. Based on all the input that we receive, we'll build statements of guiding priorities, which will help us shape our use of formula grants and choose which competitive grants may be the most beneficial for ODO to pursue. So we're actually going to start by asking you a question here so we can gauge your level of awareness on these topics as well as your assessment of your current capacity as of today. We're going to start off with a poll to get a better sense of our audience and what level of understanding you have about the federal funding opportunities. Our host, Stacy, will add the poll in, and remember that it will appear under the title Slido on the right side of your screen. We'll give everybody about 45 seconds or so on this first poll to make your selection. And don't forget to press send. You may have to scroll down after you check the box so that you can see the send box. Wait, everybody is seeing that. So thinking about your organization or community, which of these phrases or phases or stages would describe how you feel where you are in regards to federal funding? So you haven't started or you're new, assessing options and interests, prioritizing projects and funding, implementing projects or plans, or evaluate or expanding current work. So give folks some time here to respond. I'm seeing that Tim sees Slido, but it's blank. Are other people having that problem? I've noticed we have 7 people voting, so hopefully 7 of the 8 of you can see. Tim, maybe close it and restart it. And Tim, for this one, if you want to just put your response in the chat, since I think you're the only one who hasn't been able to respond, you can go ahead and do that. Oh, good. Glad it worked. Okay, I think we are ready to close this poll. Stacy? Great, looks like a lot of people are assessing their options and interests, and we've got some folks who are new to the topic, so great, glad we have a wide variety of folks joining. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jen to provide some background on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA.
The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is actually what prompted this engagement today. This federal law funds American infrastructure projects related to a wide variety of areas, from roads, bridges, to broadband internet, to our energy and water systems. And this was signed into law on November 15th of 2021. And this bipartisan legislation authorizes 1.2 trillion in infrastructure spending nationally. And that includes 550 billion in new funding. So this is something that the Biden administration is referring to as a once in a generation investment in our infrastructure systems. And energy is certainly included as part of that investment. The Biden administration also has concerns about investing these federal dollars so that the benefits serve communities that have been historically disadvantaged. While there's many details and definitions still to be set at the federal level, it's looking like the Biden administration will likely direct 40% of the benefits of these funds that we'll be discussing today to serve disadvantaged communities. And so we'll be keeping this requirement in mind that comes through us through multiple executive orders as we shape up all of our relevant proposals that may impact Oregon. And at ODO, we recognize that historically certain groups were left out of decision-making roles, particularly when it comes to energy and land issues. Our intention is to better address equity concerns with IIJA funding, but we recognize we have much to learn and much work to do in this area. And that's part of the reason why we're seeking your input through this webinar and portal today. So just to help set the stage and identify some of the broader picture of what we're looking at, we are generally talking about federal funding, which is then granted from the federal government to the state of Oregon. And this graphic here comes from one of the federal funding programs that represents how these funding streams, how these monies actually reach Oregon. At their source, they're appropriated by Congress, where they are then assigned to a federal agency to administer. From there, the funds are granted to the states through either formula or competitive grants. And depending on the nature of the fund and the federal requirements, the state may combine the federal funding with other state or private dollars to invest in the work. And at the end of the day, because the law that is authorizing the funds is federal, some of the funds are restricted in what they can be used for. And that comes straight from the law that Congress passed. Additionally, federal agencies can set rules and issue guidance to further clarify the parameters of what's allowed under these federal funds. As a result of that, certain parts of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will have more flexibility in what they can be used for than other pieces of it. But ultimately, it all stems from the law authorized by Congress. So today we are seeking your input so that we can develop guiding priorities that will assist the agency with all aspects of our grant seeking for these federal funds. In doing so, we've been speaking to energy suppliers and developers, energy-based or community-based organizations, and local governments, just to name a few, to get their impressions of what we need to consider as we work to bring these funds into our state. In the next few slides, we'll cover at a high level what some of the federal investments are. As we go through this information, please consider what you think may be missing from the list of items we'll be discussing. And in addition to that, if Odo could pick only one thing to invest in, what would be the best thing to do? We'll be asking for your responses in just a few slides. So based on what we know, we believe the state energy program will receive an additional boost of about $6.5 million, which can be used for a broad spectrum of items and investments in clean energy, energy efficiency, and resilience activities. We estimate that we will be receiving approximately 3.2 million in funding for energy efficiency programs related to a revolving loan fund and the Energy Efficiency Conservation and Block Grant Program. And the Energy Efficiency Conservation and Block Grant Program will have sub-awards out to local governments in addition. Additionally, the weatherization program that is granted to the Oregon Housing and Community Services is expected to receive about 34.7 million in funds to help low-income households with weatherization services. We also anticipate that the Oregon Department of Transportation will receive about $50 million related to electric vehicle charging stations. And we anticipate receiving at Odo approximately 50 million for grid resilience investments. Just a note on that, the application from the federal government to the state is currently open, and we will be working on that application over the next few months. There will also be a public hearing specific to the resilience and reliability item that you see there in the months ahead. We're still working on nailing down a precise date for that hearing, though. Lastly, we do anticipate that there will be a competitive application for energy auditor training up to $2 million per state. And energy auditors are an area that we have heard is a high need area for workforce development related to the energy system. So with that, I would like to pause to see if there are any questions based on that information.
So just as a reminder, you can put your question in the chat or raise your hand.
Okay.
Not seeing any questions, Jen.
We're good. Okay. So moving on, I just wanted to mention that there are quite a few other funding opportunities that are available under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. These are just some of those that are available at the federal level. As you can see, there's approximately $100 billion in additional funding related to these various topic areas, some of which state agencies may be eligible for, some may be eligible through nonprofits or universities or other types of entities. So these are all some of the opportunities we'll be watching and trying to communicate out.
Jen, we do have a quick question. The energy auditor training funding is available for homeowners and business owners. Is that right?
The Energy Auditor Training Program is a competitive grant application that's not open from the federal government yet, but it will be to support workforce development to train a variety of energy auditors related to both the residential and commercial sector. I want to be careful to distinguish that from one of our current programs where we actually we have a current grant through the USDA, which supports the cost of doing energy audits for rural businesses and agricultural businesses. So we have several programs that may be aligning here soon. So I'm happy to clarify if there's any additional questions there.
Great, thank you. I think we had a typo in our description of it. There is another question in the chat. Is Odo attaching any standards for contractors who will perform these projects within IIJA funding?
Yes, because the root of the funds are federal, at a bare minimum, the requirements of the federal funding source, which will come with different compliance related provisions, will flow down to any subrecipients of the federal funds, and some of those may also apply to contractors depending on the scope of work that is contracted out. For example, if there is a contractor who is hired to perform any sort of construction under the federal funds, we do know that based on the law that Davis-Bacon wage reporting requirements will apply. And so that is something that a contractor that would be responsible for doing construction work would at a minimum need to comply with. But yes, there will likely be various aspects of things that will need to flow down to different folks depending on what the individual scope is. Okay, so we'll move on to talk about community engagement. So based on what we've done so far, we've had some discussions with our Energy Advisory Work Group and managers of community-owned utilities, as well as some community-based organizations. We've also reached out to tribal governments and are scheduling some follow-up conversations. We've also had a meeting that was specific to workforce development, and that was a specific to a priority that we heard coming out of January's meeting. In the future, we want to gather feedback from the portal that we have so that we can create guiding priorities that can apply broadly to all of our grant seeking under IIJA to the extent that is practical within the scope of the federal requirements. We also anticipate that there will be further conversations around the hydrogen hub and around the grid resilience opportunity under which we will need to have a public hearing for.
Jen, we have another question in the chat. There was a big list of things that communities might apply for. Is that something that Odo will guide, or should folks work directly with their communities to advance those? I would say both. Definitely, it's one of the reasons why we asked that question at the beginning, is to get a better sense of the capacity within communities that may apply for some of those funds. But Odo does want to help. We've actually submitted a legislative concept to provide additional resources and a staff person at the agency to do just that, to help communities navigate federal and state funding. We don't have that position yet. We are looking to be as helpful as we can with our existing staff. So I definitely reach out and be in touch if you see something that your community might be interested in applying for, and we'll also do our best to promote opportunities that we hear of as well. And feel free to add to that, Jen.
Oh, I think that's great. I think in order to maximize the funds that we might be able to bring into the state, it's going to be a collective effort of any type of entity that may be eligible for any fund, trying to work together with partners to coordinate and collaborate so that we prepare competitive proposals. So moving on, just to give a quick overview of where we think we may be able to focus some funding and provide examples of how we could shape our proposals at the state level to focus on certain opportunities. As an example, we could use some of the federal dollars for additional research or studies, and that could support things that address statewide issues such as transmission capacity that we've heard about before. Or it could be for supporting community level planning or projects. We could also propose programs that direct benefits to individual customers and focus on energy efficiency in homes and businesses or renewable energy, as well as personal or community transportation programs. With all these options, however, we know there's also not likely enough funding available to do everything that we desire. So we must set some priorities as to how we use these funds. So in our conversations to date, we've heard about the need for greater workforce development for energy-related occupations and the skilled trades that support many aspects of any energy infrastructure. We also know there's a keen interest in making sure that energy workforce programs have strong diversity components. Related to workforce is also a concern about supply chains, making it difficult to conduct the construction projects that we need to shore up our supply chain problems in order to get the equipment and the workers in place to do the necessary infrastructure work. We've also heard a desire to increase resilience efforts, which includes both the large grid and the community level forms of resilience. Undergrounding power lines is of particular interest to some of our utility partners. Lastly, we've heard an interest in programs that benefit renters as opposed to homeowners who have long benefited from energy programs. Additionally, we heard there's a desire for navigating aspects of energy information and understanding the various incentives that could be stacked to benefit a specific project, whether it's on an individual home or a public building. And we've also heard that there's a strong desire to simplify the funding process wherever we can. So based on what we've shared, are there any topics, issues, or pathways that are missing from the previous slides? And it looks like we just launched the poll to get your feedback in response to that question. So if you have a few moments, please go ahead and type in your response if there's any topics that jump out to you that should certainly be on our list.
And I think we'll give folks about a minute and a half to enter your responses here. And as a reminder, if you are feeling pressed for time or you want to think about it more, you can feel free to respond to these same questions on our portal on our website. Okay, let's keep it open for about 30 more seconds so people can enter their short responses. Okay, you've got about 10 more seconds to finish your response and press send. And Stacy, go ahead and close the poll. All right, thank you. We've got some really good responses here. aligning and combining with existing programs, um, promoting these wins for Oregon as we finish the projects, maximizing climate and environmental justice benefits, large building systems maintenance and replacement program, um, concerned about permitting and assessment work that will delay projects, and encouraging us to advocate for expedited timelines. Great. Yep. Thanks so much. Really appreciate this feedback.
Okay. And with that, we actually have a secondary question, which is what is the most important thing that Odo could invest in to support your energy needs and interests? So once again, just looking for a short answer that can give us some real-time feedback, and we'll have this open for about a minute and a half as well.
So Renata is saying the poll didn't open. Maybe try popping it out, the little square with an arrow coming out of it to the right. I think that worked for Tim last time. And if you can't get it to open, Renata, you're welcome to put in the chat what you think is the most important thing that Odo could invest in. Okay, Jen, should we give them a 10-second warning?
Sure.
Okay, wrap up what you're writing, and we're going to close out the poll. Okay, we've got some good priorities in there: multimodal transportation to support communities, investments that are win-win, helping companies accelerate their internal decarbonization efforts, apprenticeship programs, workforce, um, augment the community renewable energy program funding with an eye towards combining resilience and disaster preparedness from a clean energy perspective, planning, coordination, um, battery storage efficiency, all really great options for this federal funding. Thank you for sharing.
All right. So some of you might be wondering why we're having this conversation now. Why not wait until we have all of the specific details about each federal funding opportunity when they arise? Well, it's mostly about helping us be ready. We anticipate that with most federal grant opportunities, we won't know the exact date when the announcement will be made. But once it does, we anticipate that we'll likely have 60 calendar days to respond with a full application. Even then, it's possible that some technical details about the fund could be modified even within that short application period. We are also anticipating that some of our most flexible funds, the ones where your input can help shape our plans the most, within the confines of the federal rules, might be among the first opportunities that are released. And so we want to be able to respond with the opportunities that we believe will benefit most Oregonians in the biggest way. And so that's why we're seeking your input today. Now, while 60 days may sound like a long time, in the scope of preparing a federal grant, it can go by in a blink. Each grant application basically has three phases. One phase where we need to review all the technical requirements and documents to apply to determine if we should move forward on an application. The second phase is where the planning, scoping, budgeting, and writing all occurs, and the drafting happens all at once. And in the final phase is where we need to run it through and make sure that the documents are all in their final form with proofreading and final executive approval. But this is also where our approval process through the legislative process occurs by notifying the Joint Ways and Means Committee or the E-Board. And if they happen to be in session, presenting before then. If they aren't in session, it happens through a retroactive letter where we later go and seek approval before the e-board. So you might be wondering how this also fits into our agency's larger budget, which we at Odo have been working on within the last few months. Because these funds are difficult to accurately predict and they are not yet awarded, or they are, because of that reason, they're not yet accounted for in our next agency budget for the next budget biennium that starts on July 1st, 2023. The approval for receiving and expending funds will most likely be granted through those e-board meetings. And all of this typically happens in just 40 to 60 calendar days. After taking out weekends and holidays, you can see how quickly the entire process needs to move. And so it's that scheduling challenge of why we're asking for your input today to help us build these guiding priorities. We want to hear your thoughts early and broadly so we can plan accordingly for the needs of the state. Now here we have a chart that describes the different opportunities and Odo's ability to direct the scope of work based on our estimation. Some funds allow for broader flexibility and require very specific, and others require very specific types of investments. For example, the State Energy Program allows for broad activities such as energy education and planning, energy efficiency programs, renewable energy programs, and transportation initiatives. In contrast, the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund will only permit funds to be used for specific types of energy audits and the subsequent upgrades to buildings recommended by those audits. As you can see, there's many unknowns that we're watching closely as more information becomes available. We also have in this chart quick little ideas of where we estimate these funds to be and the scale of their flexibility, as well as their potential size. And we are certainly watching all of those unknown boxes as the information continues to be released from the US Department of Energy. So with that, I will pause to see if there are any additional questions.
Jen, there is a question in the chat. Is there a role for businesses or business groups to review opportunities and encourage Oregon or Oregon communities to apply for them? And I can start with that, which is, yes, we plan to promote these opportunities and make businesses and consumers and other interested parties aware of them and seek feedback on them as much as possible. But as Jen said, some of them may come up very quickly. It may not be super transparent to us from the federal level. So that's why we're trying to get a better sense of priorities early in case we do have to do some quick turnaround decisions. But I think the short answer to your question is yes, we want to hear, very much want to hear what folks think about the opportunities. And perhaps my colleague Casey can put a link to the website that the governor's office has put together that includes all of the opportunities and has a great chart of not just energy, but also broadband and health and transportation. We link to it from our website, but we can put a direct link that should give you a better sense of all the types of opportunities that are out there. Feel free to jump in with more, Jen, if you like.
I think that's great. The chart that is managed by the state is an adaptation by Oregon based on a guidebook that has been published by the White House to help communities plan for and anticipate the different funding opportunities under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Overall, it represents 380, more than 380 programs across the federal government. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, move on to the next slide.
All right, so back to me for a few minutes. As I mentioned at the beginning, our goal today is to seek input so we can draft guiding priorities based on what we've heard. And these guiding priorities will help us decide whether ODO should put staff time into preparing applications for specific funding opportunities, particularly those competitive ones, and also how we should shape our program designs to best meet Oregon's needs, where we do have the flexibility and discretion to do so within the federal funding requirements. So as we think about how to spend and prioritize this funding, we're not starting with a blank slate. There will be a lot of sideboards on the funding already when it comes to us from the federal government. And the administration has shared their priorities with the state, which are on this slide. So these will ground us. And I won't read all of these, but you can see that they're focused on avoiding waste, buying American, high labor standards, equity, resilience, and climate change, and coordination. Governor Brown has also made it clear in standing up an infrastructure cabinet at the state level that she wants agencies to demonstrate how they will meet these national priorities in a way that addresses Oregon's values of climate equity and racial justice. She also wants us to make sure that we're including the voices of marginalized communities that have been left out of these decisions in the past. So layered on top of the federal and state priorities in terms of where ODO has some discretion, we will also be looking to our mission. So what are the priorities in our mission? Priorities are informing Oregonians, making sure we have a resilient and affordable energy system, transitioning to a clean energy future in an equitable way, protecting public health and the environment, and balancing needs and impacts. When putting together priorities, we can also look to our authorizing statutes, which show up in ORS 469010 for those of you state code junkies. The priorities that we glean from that language are renewable and sustainable diverse energy forms, efficiency, state leadership, prioritizing human needs, preserving environmental quality, energy efficient transportation, cost effectiveness, and providing impartial and objective information. And then finally, the Oregon Department of Energy has a new strategic plan, which I'm hoping Casey can put a link to in the chat. Our plan has 5 areas of focus, which you see on the right column of this slide. So as we're looking at this federal funding and where to invest it, we're keeping in mind our priorities to expand and improve stakeholder engagement, to build practices and processes that achieve more inclusive and equitable outcomes, to enhance organizational data capabilities, modernize our programs, and optimize efficiency at the agency. So luckily, all of these priorities seem pretty consistent with what's coming out of US DOE and the guidance documents around IIJA, including Justice 40 and climate change. Now, before we ask you a bunch of questions, I will pause to see what questions we have from you. Oh, interesting question in the chat. What are the attributes or strengths that you see for Oregon that will make us likely to win certain grants and thus become a lens for what we should apply for? I think we have so many. One that came to mind as we were talking about the hydrogen hub, for example, is Oregon's leadership on clean energy. We have a clean and a getting cleaner every day electricity system that could be leveraged to create green hydrogen in a way that not a lot of states have. We have really strong climate change policies and goals and leadership here in the state that I think, especially to this administration, will make us pretty attractive. Jen or Casey, do you have any other attributes or strengths that you want to highlight? And I see that Ryan has suggested that we have strong labor standards for renewable energy projects in our state too. Thanks for pointing that out.
I think those are some great highlights that make Oregon competitive in different opportunities.
Question for you, Jen. Is there a federal or state definition of disadvantaged communities that will determine eligibility for beneficiaries?
At this time, we are still awaiting guidance from the U.S. Department of Energy as to the definition of a disadvantaged community. I do believe different federal agencies may have issued guidance on this already, but they are interpreting it uh, by issuing their own guidance based on their agency and the types of programs that they operate. And so we're waiting on that information, and we're not quite sure how detailed it may be when it is released. I will say that within Oregon, we do have a definition of a environmental justice community. And so that has served to inform us as we're preparing for what a disadvantaged community may look like under the federal definition, but we're still waiting for that for the precise details.
All right, don't forget you can raise your hand if you would like to ask a question live, but I really appreciate these questions and comments coming into the chat. And let's move on to the next slide. So underlying all of what we just discussed are the values of efficiency, effectiveness, equity, and transparency. And this is really the essence of how we'll hope to work on these programs and funding streams. We will aim for an efficient, effective, equitable, and transparent use of resources. However, we recognize that there are natural tensions that will arise in this process, and sometimes tensions between these different values. For example, we are presented with a valuable funding opportunity in which there's only 40 days to apply. ODO may struggle to keep the public fully informed or really, get that feedback that we know we'd like. So our question for you is, keeping all of this in mind, what does successful implementation look like? So Stacy has launched another poll, and please take a minute and a half or so to type in a short answer, and then don't forget to press send when you're done. Okay, should we give maybe 20 more seconds? All right, please wrap up your response and press send, and we will move on to the next slide. Oh, great, thank you. let's see, full disbursement of funds. Yes, want to make sure we get the money out the door. Um, Defensible distribution across beneficiaries, giving people ample opportunities to develop and submit projects, grants for both development and deployment, cooperative effort in diverse communities and industries, keeping in mind the executive order for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, clear scoring of applications, making sure Oregon is, all of Oregon is served, career development, decarbonization, focusing on benefits for historically marginalized groups. Great, thank you so much for that feedback. Okay. So a core focus of our strategic plan is to ensure that we're working with a diverse range of stakeholders and having a meaningful and inclusive discussion. Throughout our process to apply for and implement federal funding, we will prioritize this inclusive engagement. So we have a question, another poll for you on that. Given the limited time to apply for federal funds, how can ODO support inclusivity in design and or implementation of federally funded programs? What is your advice to us on how we can be inclusive and equitable in our engagement on this topic? And we've got another poll. While you're thinking about that, I see that Tim Miller has his hand up. Stacy, please go ahead and take Tim off mute. Tim, you're off mute. You can ask your question. Yep.
Okay, I missed the 5-second countdown on the last one, so my suggestions on the last one didn't make it in, and I was just going to say that I would suggest, based on balancing those values, if you could emphasize winning the grant if you're under pressure, and then once that's in place, you could then double back and focus on really gathering more input and being more inclusive. And during an implementation or a procurement or a refining of the design phase, to really round out some of those other values. So there may be a push and pull on those values that way, where you can focus on winning first and then do the other later. And the other comment was, to consider on which grants or proposals you have stakeholders sort of standing by and ready to help or interested in participating, and leverage those partners, community partners, businesses, whoever they are, to help you get some applications out the door or information. Prioritize those where you can get help.
Great, thanks, Tim. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Yes, definitely. We want to get the federal dollars here to Oregon. That is the priority. Okay, I see we've got a couple people who have some ideas on how we can support inclusivity in program design and implementation. Let's give folks another 20 seconds. Okay, please wrap up what you are writing and press send. Okay, great. Posting requests for input on our website, but also sending emails to broad lists of interested parties. Great. Hopefully all of you will sign up for our email so that we can send you emails advertising in communities with low incomes. Great. Direct outreach in person if possible to racially, socioeconomically, geographically, and otherwise disadvantaged communities. Staff point people for key groups. Great. A labor staff person. Yeah, that's a great idea. And we don't, I don't know that we have a specific labor staff person. We don't have enough staff people to be able to designate someone specifically for labor, but we do have some folks who focus on outreach and engagement who definitely try to keep labor in mind and are working to develop those relationships. Casey is a member of our strategic engagement team, which is prioritizing those relationships. So thank you for that. All right, moving on.
Okay. So we also understand that applying for federal funding involves several resource-intensive steps, such as drafting an application, collecting letters of support, and tracking project activities and reporting back to the federal grant agency once you receive the award. Understanding and administering federal funding can be very time-intensive and difficult due to lack of capacity or expertise. On the other hand, many others already have experience managing federal funding and are ready to sustain or expand this level of activity and/or implementation of federal funds. And so our question is whether there are ways that ODO can support communities applying for energy-related federal funding under the IIJA. So with that, we also have another poll that has been launched. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes to provide your response to how we might be able to support communities who are thinking about preparing applications.
All right, let's give folks about 20 more seconds. Okay, please go ahead and wrap up your response and press send. Okay, some good advice on finding partners who've already scaled up their capacity and get them to help those that don't have capacity, or stand up a team in ODA that has capacity. Yes, that's great. We have a legislative concept for that. Providing access to expert consultants may help guide through the process, step-by-step tutorial. Distribution areas decided instead of first come, first serve application, which favors people who have the time to apply. Holistic approach to working with communities. Webinars are helpful, good. Grant writing expenses, yes, can be formidable for many applicants. Consider subsidizing it for disadvantaged groups. Yes, first come, first serve has has some benefits, but definitely runs the risk of benefiting those who are already advantaged. All right, thank you for that feedback.
Thanks. So, moving on, we understand that the effort to bring in new people or new organizations to the level that's needed to manage federal funding can be very time intensive, as well as a high learning curve. And as was pointed out in some of the comments, there may already be people who can sustain that level of activity. So we've learned lessons as an agency from our past experience and our current experience with managing federal funds. They're an amazing resource, but the administrative aspects cannot be overlooked. The management of federal funds, to manage it effectively, it needs a certain level of expertise. And that level of expertise can grow if a project involves construction, which carries more federal requirements than other types of work. And so with that, we're wondering about what best describes your capacity to implement and administer federal funding. Would you say that you have the capacity and expertise to implement and administer or are you unsure if you have the capacity and expertise? Or are you at the stage where you know you lack the capacity and the expertise and would need assistance from some other source in order to be able to apply for federal funding? So if you could go ahead and mark where you think you're at in the poll, that would be helpful as we're gauging from the self-assessment of where different community members might be at.
All right, let's have 10 more seconds on this one. Please get your response in and don't forget to press send. Great, a lot of people unsure or know they lack capacity. Good to know, thank you.
Great. And that's the perfect lead in for our next question. So if you are among an organization that lacks the capacity or expertise, is there substantive energy education or technical assistance that ODO can provide or offer to your community to help you be better positioned to apply for and receive federal funding? So if you can go ahead and type in your short responses to this poll, we'd really appreciate it.
Okay, let's go about 20 more seconds on this one. Right, please go ahead and wrap up your answer and press send. Will be closing in 10 seconds. Okay, ways that Odo can help. Serving as central tracking and reporting experts, helping with grant writing expertise, make sure applications are simple, guidance on the requirements or barriers for receiving the funding. Great, thank you very much.
All right, so knowing that there's more to come, how would you prefer to receive updates from Odo? And if you could take a look at the options, and in the poll that is just now popping up, go ahead and rank your preferred choice in order of preference. It's our desire to find out how folks would like to receive future updates so that we are using the method that works for the most folks.
And I think this is our last poll. Is that right, Jen?
Yes, it is.
Great. And we'll give about a minute to answer this one because I know it can be complicated to rank options. Okay, you can go ahead and spend 20 more seconds wrapping that up. A good reminder from Tim, scroll down to send if you're on a laptop with a small screen. All right, I think we've got a good response on this one. Thank you. Okay, people like their email and their webinars. Definitely, Odo would love to show up at existing public meetings. So please keep us posted if there's a place where you think we could come and share information and get feedback. Now we are on to next steps. We will be collecting the feedback from these webinars and other communications and that portal to review starting in early August to shape our guiding priorities for IIJA investments. So please, if you want to provide further thoughts, or if you didn't get a chance to say everything you wanted to say today, or you want to share this with your friends and colleagues, please enter your information into our portal by August 3rd. We will then use the information to better understand what success will look like for our state and use the information to share draft priorities with our Energy Advisory Work Group and members of the Racial Justice Council who may provide comments to further refine our approach. This is an effort that the governor is leading with her infrastructure cabinet, working directly with the Racial Justice Council as well. And once we have those guiding priorities developed, we'll apply those to our grant seeking efforts and share information with the public. So just a quick overview of how the guiding principles will apply to federal funds. Your feedback through this process will help us be ready to apply for the right opportunities for our state. It will also help us shape our programs where we have the ability to, within the federal requirements, to have some discretion, and it will enable us to act inclusively with the knowledge that we may have limited time to conduct engagement on each funding opportunity. Thank you again for joining us today. Looks like we have some time for questions. If people would like to put information in or put a question in the chat or raise their hands. I see a question from Tim. Is Odo up for being invited to group meetings to cover this once there are many live opportunities? Absolutely, Tim. We will make it a priority to get out in front of communities as much as we can to share this information and get feedback. Other questions, comments? And thank you, everyone, for joining us and spending your Wednesday evening with us. We really appreciate your time and your perspective. So we'll hang out here in awkward silence for a little while in case anybody wants to ask a question or put a question in the chat. But for those of you who don't have questions, this is the end of our presentation. And again, we really appreciate you joining us this evening and hope that you will go on to our portal and provide more feedback. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions, and I know it's past 7 o'clock, so people probably have their evenings they want to get on with. And again, thank you for being here, and thanks to the Odo team for pulling this off. Have a good night.